How can a murder be committed with such a level of security? Not even knowing which door Vincent Fan lives behind, what chance is there to make a move? The entire security operation seems as solid as a barrel, utterly impregnable. Yet, Chase-Chin thought again, this place isn't Zongnanhai. How could the security be truly flawless? There must be an opportunity, and he was sure to seize it. As for exactly how to do it, that still required careful planning. At the same time, the cooperation of that friend was also needed. Boss, the plastic bottle has been brought back. Dr. Chen, holding something in one hand and looking at the report with the other, said, people from the forensic department of the city bureau said they haven't seen such a dangerous thing for many years. They had to dismantle it in the poison gas lab with full-body safety gear. What's inside? Greg Wong asked anxiously. Indeed, it's cyanide, the most dangerous kind, hydrogen cyanide. Hydrogen cyanide? Greg Wong pondered the name, saying, seems like the poison gas used by the Nazis for killing? Dr. Chen nodded. Correct, the Nazis used this. Hydrogen cyanide is gaseous above 26 degrees Celsius. Now it's winter, so it's in liquid form. It's a highly toxic substance strictly controlled by the public security departments, but the extraction is very simple. Just heat carbon and ammonia gas at a fixed ratio. The whole process only requires simple substances such as methane, sodium hydroxide, ammonia gas, etc., all of which can be easily extracted from other materials. The murderer was able to make metallic sodium and purify nicotine, so the process of making hydrogen cyanide is even easier. The only thing to pay attention to is the protection of the extractor during the refining process, but since the murderer could purify nicotine, he must be well-versed in this aspect of protection. The City Bureau, through identification, found that the concentration of hydrogen cyanide in the plastic bottle was over 95%, plus the murderer's high-purity nicotine. The City Bureau experts said that if the murderer did not use industrial equipment to complete this, then his precision in experimental conditions and various substance dosage combinations is absolutely expert level. Greg Wong's lips tightened, his face turning pale. This series of evidence further solidified his judgment that the murderer was Jasmine Gan's classmate. Ordinary chemical industry workers simply do not have this level of expertise. Even if they could refine nicotine and hydrogen cyanide, the purity would not reach industrial standards. Only Jasmine Gan's classmate, a professional with formal education, could produce such a terrifying poison. Dr. Chen opened the plastic, pointing inside and explaining. Hydrogen cyanide is highly corrosive, but this kind of PE plastic bottle can preserve it. The murderer made 2 plastic bottles, both filled with hydrogen cyanide, and tied these 2 bottles together. The cap is specially processed by the murderer, connected to a battery, motor, and remote control device outside the bottle. This set of motors and remote controllers should be taken from remote control cars or toy planes by the murderer. The murderer hung these 2 connected bottles on the fence of Li Gang's iron gate, at a height almost the same as a human head. In this way, one bottle faces outside the iron gate, and the other inside. When Li Gang stood outside the door, the murderer, hiding in the distance, operated the remote control to press the switch of the bottle outside the door. When Siyu stood inside the door, the murderer pressed the other switch. In addition, the murderer painted the entire device black, making it not easy for the target to spot at night. Once the murderer pressed the remote control switch, the motor would rotate to press down the bottle cap, and hydrogen cyanide would spray out in a mist form in large quantities. Boss, should I try to show you? Okay, give it a try. Dr. Chen placed the bottle on the ground. He pressed the bottle cap with his hand, and the water inside sprayed out, fast and in large quantities. Greg Wong said, this thing is very much like a spray bottle used for watering flowers. Yes, exactly. The plug of the bottle mouth is modified from a spray bottle. A large spray bottle costs more than 10 yuan each, available everywhere. The murderer took a spray bottle for modification, first pressurizing the inside of the bottle to create high pressure. Once the motor rotates, after the bottle cap is pressed down, the poison gas will spray out, probably reaching 2 meters away. The amount sprayed is also far more than that of a large spray bottle. That is to say, when Li Gang was about to open the door, even if he saw this bottle, as long as the murderer pressed the switch, the area within 2 meters of Li Gang would be filled with high-concentration hydrogen cyanide gas. He wouldn't have time to react, and the amount inhaled would be enough to kill him. There's no chance to escape. Greg Wong narrowed his eyes slightly. How far can the remote control reach? 20 to 30 meters is no problem. That is to say, at that time, the murderer was hiding somewhere outside Li Gang's villa, secretly watching Li Gang return home to open the door. He pressed the remote control switch and poisoned Li Gang to death. Then, when Suyo came out, she walked to the iron gate, and the murderer pressed the remote control again. Exactly. The first bottle sprayed outwards, towards Li Gang. The second bottle sprayed inwards, towards Suyao. Greg Wong added, and at that time, Suyao's attention was all on her fallen son. She wouldn't notice the existence of the iron box. Dr. Chen said. Even if she noticed, it would be too late. As soon as Suyao stepped into the spray radius of the bottle, with the high purity of hydrogen cyanide inside, just one breath would quickly lead to difficulty breathing. At this point, people would involuntarily open their mouths to breathe heavily, only accelerating death. Is there no way to save someone from hydrogen cyanide poisoning? If it's ingested, and it's immediately discovered that cyanide has been ingested, inducing vomiting right away, there's a certain probability of survival. But with such a high concentration of gas mist, just one breath, and within a dozen seconds, there will be difficulty breathing. There's no way to save. Greg Wong thought for a moment and realized, if the concentration of hydrogen cyanide in the bottle wasn't high enough, would Suyao and her son have a certain chance of surviving? Yes, if the concentration is low, the amount inhaled from the first breath wouldn't be enough to be completely fatal, and if the victim reacts quickly, escaping the spray radius immediately, although there's a risk to life. As long as they are sent to the hospital for emergency treatment in time, it's possible to save them. Greg Wong took a deep breath. The murderer didn't hesitate to expose his professional level to us, the police, by producing ultra-high purity nicotine and hydrogen cyanide. The original purpose was that once implemented, the victim could die within a minute or two, 100% fatal, with no chance of being saved. He was committing the crime with the attitude that the target must die. What kind of relationship with Jasmine Gone could make the murderer so crazy? Greg Wong fell into thought. Indeed, it's him again. Greg Wong, stroking his stubbled face, stared solemnly at the computer video. In the video, a chubby man wearing a hat and mask walked through the frame leisurely. When passing through the middle, he deliberately raised his head, stood in place, and looked at the surveillance for a few moments before leaving. Jacqueline said, if it weren't for the chubby man deliberately staying in the video, we wouldn't have found the suspect so quickly. What time did he enter the community? 7:08. The chubby man entered the community from the east gate, and later he also left the community from the east gate. This video was obtained from the surveillance inside the community next to Li Gang's house. Because he deliberately stayed, the investigating officer quickly noticed him, and from the east gate surveillance, they found his entrance and exit footage. Did he make any obvious movements towards the video when entering and exiting the community? No, he only stayed for a while under the surveillance inside the community and looked up. When entering and exiting the community gate, he walked normally, even slightly lowering his head. Greg Wong slightly squinted his eyes, analyzing. So it seems, the murderer didn't show any abnormalities when entering and exiting the community because he didn't want to attract attention. But after committing the crime, he deliberately stayed under surveillance, exposing himself, wanting to directly tell us that this case was also his doing. Jacqueline said fiercely, exactly. This criminal is really too arrogant. Greg Wong nodded, then shook his head again, pondering. No, I think the answer is not that simple. Look, he is actually a very careful person. When entering and exiting the gate, he didn't make any weird actions towards the surveillance, pretending to be an ordinary resident passing by. And only after committing the crime, near Li Gang's house in this community's surveillance, when there was only him passing under the surveillance with no one around, did he deliberately expose himself to the surveillance. If he was inherently arrogant, showing a psychopathic style of crime, he would have a strong desire to display that this was his doing, and when entering and exiting the gate surveillance, he would also be eager to leave his unique characteristics. These psychopathic criminals with a strong desire to display tend to leave more clues, making it easier for us to solve the case. But he didn't, from beginning to end. I feel he must be a very calm person, not leaving any direct clues from start to finish. Combined with the River family case, the murderer also only appeared on the surveillance on Anil Road to flip the bird, while he avoided other surveillance on different routes. Thinking back to the situation when this person talked to us, assuming the call was also this chubby man, not another accomplice, he must have used a voice changer, speaking arrogantly. I think this is his intentional hiding of his true character. You've studied criminal psychology. You should know. Those who meticulously plan murders, Their criminal personality and their real personality are opposite. The purpose is to hide themselves. This murderer's real personality might not be an arrogant person. On the contrary, a rational, low-profile image fits more with the murderer in my mind, also matching his careful style of avoiding surveillance. Jacqueline carefully considered Greg Wong's words and nodded, saying, "Boss, your deduction is correct. The murderer deliberately exposed himself to a surveillance camera only twice after committing the crimes. In other surveillance footage, there's no trace of him at all. He avoided routes with surveillance cameras to leave, obviously to reduce the risk of being caught. But why would he deliberately show his face on camera twice if he could have just acted normally from start to finish?" Greg Wong was also full of confusion and sighed. Yeah, if he had passed by the surveillance cameras and just walked by like a passerby, we probably wouldn't even know the murderer's physical characteristics by now. But he deliberately revealed that he is the murderer, staying in view of the cameras. Although he wore a hat and a mask, not showing his real face, it still provides us with clues for solving the case. At least we now have a clear idea of his height and weight. He is a meticulous and calm person, committing crimes very cleverly and discreetly, not at all gruesome or bloody. The 4 victims had no wounds on their bodies. If it weren't for our police intervention, others wouldn't even know that the victims were murdered. He isn't the type who wants to make a big case and get caught by the police to satisfy his criminal desires, so this abnormal behavior under surveillance is hard to explain. Jacqueline pondered for a long time and said, "Boss, I have a different view. I still tend to think that the murderer is a person with a psychological disorder. From the arrogant tone of the murderer when he called us, and his deliberate exposure to the surveillance cameras showing he is the murderer. As for your point that he didn't expose himself in other surveillance footage, I think a criminal doesn't need to reveal himself at every intersection. Showing his face after committing the crimes is already enough to demonstrate his desire for performance." Greg Wong shook his head firmly, continuing to persuade Jacqueline. "You need to look at the problem by combining all the clues from both cases from beginning to end, maintaining the coherence of your thoughts. First, all 4 victims died of poisoning, a clean and efficient method. From the perspective of criminal behavior analysis, the murderer used poison to make the murders more discreet, better protecting himself from being discovered. If someone with a psychological disorder or a desire for criminal performance were to commit the crime, they would often use brutal methods such as bloodshed or dismemberment to express their subconscious perverse demands. Second, the murderer only showed his face to one surveillance camera after committing the crimes twice, and did not show any abnormalities when passing by other cameras, choosing to avoid surveillance as much as possible. This is not a coincidence. It indicates that he does not really want to expose himself, but must have some other purpose. As for what that purpose is, I can't guess at all now. Third, he spoke arrogantly and rashly in the Jiang family case. But if you look back at the entire case, his arrogance was actually leading Lily Wong and our police step by step into his trap, thus realizing his plot to destroy money and kill people. Although he was arrogant, the entire Jiang family case was executed flawlessly, without showing his face from beginning to end. Could the executor of such meticulous criminal methods be an arrogant and rash person? Impossible. Fourth, the murderer's motive is now very clear, which is to take revenge for Jasmine Gone. If it was just to vent emotions of hatred, the murderer should have made as much noise as possible. But both times, he discreetly used poison to kill, making the murders bloodless. This also contradicts your point about the murderer having a desire for criminal performance. Jacqueline thought for a moment and smacked his lips. Well, maybe you're right, but I still hold my own judgment. I believe more that the murderer is a person with a desire for criminal performance. Greg Wong nodded helplessly. The analysis I've made is only based on the current limited clues and may not be the final answer. What kind of person the murderer is, no one can say for sure now. Jacqueline said, "By the way, in this crime, besides the fat man, we still don't know who the other accomplice is. According to Old Chin's identification, the murderer was within a few dozen meters of the Lee family, controlling the plastic bottle with a remote control. According to the surveillance footage, Li Gang entered the community at 8:11, and it is estimated that it took a minute or two to get to his own doorstep, get out of the car, and open the door when he was murdered. His mother, Su Yao's time of death was about the same, because both were found by other passing residents at 8:20. So, the death time of Su Yao and her son was between 8:11 and 8:20. But the fat man entered the community at 7:08, stayed for 10 minutes, and left the community at 7:18. After that, The surveillance never saw the fat man enter the community again. That is to say, the fat man left before the crime happened. The last one to operate the remote control and take action was another person. But we haven't noticed anyone suspicious in the surveillance so far. Greg Wong touched his forehead, puzzled. Why did the fat man enter the community after 7 o'clock and leave after 10 minutes? Operating the remote control is a simple task. Since he had already entered the community, why didn't he wait inside and do it himself, instead letting another accomplice do it? Jacqueline said, "Yeah, it's very strange. We know at least that the fat man is the murderer, but for that accomplice, we don't even know if it's a man or a woman, with no clues for us to investigate. We also can't tell if this accomplice entered the community after the fat man left or was already inside before, let alone whether the accomplice left the community quickly after the crime or hid inside the community to leave the next day, or even possibly lived in the community, not leaving for several days. It's even more difficult to find him." Greg Wong pondered for a while and sighed. Yes, the identity of this accomplice is even more mysterious. The relationship between the fat man and the accomplice, the roles they played in the crime, we know nothing. Tomorrow, I'll go to Binjiang community again and take a closer look at the environment inside. The next day, Greg Wong, Jacqueline, and Dr. Chen, dressed in plain clothes, drove to Binjiang community. Since Greg Wong planned to observe the entire route, they parked the car outside the community and entered on foot. When they entered through the east gate, the security guard did not stop the three of them, not even giving them a glance. Jacqueline said, "Boss, the security here doesn't care about pedestrians and non-motor vehicles, which provided conditions for the murderer." Greg Wong pursed his lips helplessly. "There's nothing we can do. In such a large community, with 4 gates to the east, south, west, and north, it's impossible to manage everything. What about motor vehicles? Are they all registered?" We asked, and during the day, most motor vehicles are still allowed to pass. After the evening rush hour, external vehicles are generally not allowed in. Greg Wong pondered for a moment and said, "We need to check later if any of the dozens of vehicles that passed Anil Road on the night of the Jiang case have entered Binjiang community recently. In the Li family case, there was no need for vehicles. You see, the fat man entered on foot, and his accomplice only needed to press the remote control, so there was no need for vehicles, right?" "That's true, but we can't rule out the possibility that the murderer came to scout the area by driving directly into the community. But Binjiang community is too large, with thousands of vehicles entering and exiting every day. Surveillance cameras can't record all the license plates clearly, and the workload is really beyond our manpower. Plus, even if the murderer did scout the area by driving in, he might not use the same vehicle or might have changed the license plate, so we can't continue this investigation." Greg Wong understood. First of all, the murderer scouting the area might not have driven, and even if he did, he might not have used the same vehicle, and even if it was the same vehicle, the license plate might have been changed. Moreover, it's unknown which day he came to scout the area, whether it was a few days before the crime or many days before. Not to mention that the detective team only has about 20 people. Even 200 people would not be able to handle the workload of comparing every vehicle entering and exiting Binjiang community every day to see if it was one of the dozens of vehicles from Anil Road. What's more, if the murderer didn't use a vehicle for the crime at all, then a large amount of investigation work would be in vain. Greg Wong thought for a while, realizing that relying on surveillance to confirm whether vehicles are repeated is not reliable. He changed his mind and said, "Change the approach. When you go back, send someone to investigate those 50 or so car owners again to see where they were on the night of the Li family case, and whether they have solid alibi or evidence of not being present. Of course, if it's the murderer, he would have prepared for his alibi that night, creating evidence to exclude the possibility of his committing the crime. After you finish the investigation, compile a detailed report listing each person's whereabouts that night and the evidence supporting their whereabouts. I want to go through them one by one to see who is lying." "Okay, I'll get on it right away. Be sure to hurry. It's only been 3 days now. Investigating sooner will make it easier to break through. The longer we wait, the harder it will be to determine the whereabouts of these car owners that night." Then the 3 of them continued forward, heading towards the Li family's home. Along the way, Greg Wong once again memorized all the details of the routes and surveillance, arriving at the Li family's doorstep. At that time, Li Gang's home was filled with relatives and friends helping with the funeral. The 3 of them did not enter but looked around the villa. Greg Wong said, "I've looked at the surveillance inside the community just now. There are a few sections where surveillance is missing, making it easy for the murderer to avoid and bypass. Jacqueline said, yes, apart from the main entrance and the surveillance camera that Fatty deliberately left behind. We didn't find any trace of Fatty. Obviously, he bypassed it. Dr. Chen pointed to a green area on the west side and said, Boss, we speculate that the murderer was hiding in these bushes at that time, controlling the spray bottle with a remote control. Have you checked the grass? Yes, we didn't find any clues left behind. Including footprints, since many people have walked through, it's impossible to know which one belongs to the murderer. Greg Wong's face darkened. Today's investigation gave them a deeper understanding of the murderer's actions, but they made no substantial progress in solving the case. He pondered for a moment and then said, Captain Lin, go back and immediately check the whereabouts of the car owners on Annell Road that night. Also, we've been delayed by the new case of the Lee family these days. We need to continue investigating Jasmine Gan's classmates, especially Wu Gang, right away. All right, I'll get right on it. Also, accompany me to the He family tomorrow. I want to have a chat with Jasmine Gan's grandmother. Chase Chen walked around this high-end civil servant residential area with tight security once again. On the surface, the chance of entering for on-site reconnaissance was slim. The security guards at the entrance were very strict with the people and vehicles entering and exiting, and the entire residential area was surrounded by high walls. Even if he were an athletic star, not to mention his poor physical condition, he couldn't climb over the high wall. To enter the residential area, one could only go through the main entrance. But with tight security at the main entrance, there was hardly any opportunity. What should he do? Should he deal with Zhang Hongba first and then come back to solve Vincent Fan? After hesitating for a while, Chase Chen decided against this idea and continued with the plan. But how to do reconnaissance? Chase Chen looked around. This area was on the outskirts of the county, with no tall buildings nearby to overlook the entire residential area. Then, his gaze fell on a mountain not far away. This was the nearest mountain, and from its height, one could clearly see the entire residential area. However, it was too far away and required the use of a telescope. Ordinary telescopes couldn't see things 1 or 2 kilometers away. Right? He needed to buy a professional high-powered telescope. Luckily, telescopes were not controlled items, and even buying military telescopes didn't require real name registration, which was very convenient. Well, that's the plan. First, buy a high-powered telescope, then go to the mountain for long-distance observation and reconnaissance. Although it was a bit troublesome, this method was very safe and the most reliable one he could think of at the moment. In the evening, Chase Chen arrived at a Chinese fast food chain restaurant outside the residential area. He picked up his meal and was about to find a seat when he suddenly made eye contact with someone. Xander Su was sitting in a corner, pretending to eat slowly and watching him. Chase Chen looked around and confirmed it was just Xander Su alone. Then, he slowly walked over to the table, put down his plate, took a bite of his food, and said in a voice that others couldn't detect, "How did you find me?" Xander Su lowered his head to eat and whispered, "You don't have a phone now, but I remember you mentioned you bought a house in this residential area. I looked around, and this is the only decent place to eat. You wouldn't cook for yourself, so I figured you'd come here to eat." Chase Chen continued to eat, as if the two were strangers, and said with a hint of amusement in his tone, "It seems you've learned quite a bit from dealing with the police over the years. I think you're more qualified than the cops in the county." "Cut the crap," Xander Su said sternly. "Did you do Li Gang's wife and son?" Chase Chen took a bite of his food, shook his head while eating, and said, "You shouldn't ask that question because you never knew I had returned to the country. This has nothing to do with you, and it's better not to ask. Knowing too much won't make you feel any better." Xander Su clenched his teeth and gripped his chopsticks tightly, trying not to lose his temper. "It was you, wasn't it?" "I don't know. I don't know any Li Gang," Chase Chen replied calmly, continuing to eat. "Don't know?" Xander Su said angrily in a low voice. "Do you think saying, 'I don't know,' in the future will make people believe you? Whether they believe it or not is their business. You can tell those who don't believe to bring evidence. Every time we meet, you might not be aware, but I choose places without surveillance. No one knows we've met. Do you understand what I mean? So, you never knew I returned to the country, and we've never met." Xander Su exhaled slowly. "How long are you going to keep this up?" Chase Chen smiled lightly. "Very soon. It will all be over." "It's you who will be over." "And me too." Xander Su couldn't help but raise his voice. Chase Chen moved his chubby cheeks, still looking calm. "Why are you so pessimistic about the future? You're still not leaving now." Sooner or later, you'll be caught, you know? Chase nodded with a smile. Given the current development of the case, the probability of me being caught is indeed getting higher. But if I get caught, it won't affect you at all. No one will suspect you. Xander Su suppressed his voice, gritting his teeth. Do you think Greg Wong is a fool? No. Greg Wong is not stupid. At least from what I know about him investigating my height and weight, and then investigating Jasmine Gaughan's old classmate. He's not stupid at all. On the contrary, he's quite smart. However, his intelligence is still within my expectations. You're really crazy. Xander Su turned his head away. Chase laughed. Don't worry. Even if I get caught, Greg Wong won't suspect you, and I won't betray you. What makes you so confident? Chase said, I've inquired a bit. Greg Wong is a good cop, a really good cop. Many people say he has a strong sense of justice. He took the lead in wanting to catch River. If it weren't for other colleagues stopping him, River would have been dealt with by him long ago. I heard he also wants to deal with Vincent Fan, but he doesn't have the ability. I like him and admire him. I've played a few jokes on him before, but those were just jokes. He'll forgive me. Bullshit. Xander Su wanted to scold him loudly but had to keep his voice down due to the people around. Having a strong sense of justice means he won't let go of any criminal with connections. Having a strong sense of justice doesn't mean he won't use methods against you. He won't torture me. Don't worry. Chase was still full of confidence. You don't know anything. You'll understand why in the future. I've caught his weak spot. Xander Su snorted coldly. He's not corrupt, not bad. You can't catch his weak spot. Well, it doesn't matter what you think. You'll know in the future. Chase continued to be mysterious. Xander Su took a deep breath, paused with his chopsticks for a moment, and then said, I'll ask you one more time. When exactly are you leaving? Just wait a bit longer. The remaining work will be done very quickly. Who is your accomplice? Sorry, I can't answer that question even more. Xander Su bit his lower lip, looking utterly disheartened. I really wish I could kill you right now. Chase was taken aback and after a while said, I understand your current position, your identity, your thoughts. I know that your true wish is for me to die right now, but I also know that you don't dare. Why are you so confident? Do you think I really don't dare? Chase snorted. I'm doing these things because I lost the most precious thing. You have this idea because you want to protect your most precious thing. But killing someone and getting away with it completely is difficult for you, a liberal arts student. From your interest perspective, the risk of killing me is much higher than the possibility of me revealing you even if I get caught. You'll calculate this account clearly. Xander Su sat woodenly in the chair, and after a while, his gaze turned from flames to ice, and he said coldly, Fine. Chase, I regret knowing you, regret being your friend for decades. I didn't expect you to be such a selfish person. I really regret not reporting you the first time we met. Chase looked guilty and said, I'm sorry. Originally, all of this was my private matter. I shouldn't have dragged you into it. It was because of my lack of understanding of mobile technology that involved you. Do you trust me? Trust you with what? Xander Su looked at him with contempt. Believe that I will arrange everything properly. I don't believe it.